Turn to Jesus. He holds the key to heaven. We read from Luke chapter 23. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is the word of the Lord. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Amen. Lent is a time for reflection, and tonight we reflect on this. God never does what you would. He never does what you're expecting. You see this all the time in Jesus' life. Wise men from the east come rolling into Jerusalem with gifts fit for a king. They expect to find the king in a palace. Instead, they find him off the beaten path in Bethlehem. They're not expecting that. Jesus tells his disciples to feed a crowd of over 5,000. They say it's hopeless until Jesus raids a boys' picnic lunch and serves the most famous fish supper ever. The disciples aren't expecting that. This principle is especially true when Jesus hangs on the cross. Nobody in their right mind expects the almighty King of the universe to be crucified. Crucifixion is inflicted only on the lowest of the low. But then again, Jesus is the king we don't expect. Plus, there's all this stuff. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The elite of Israel are there when Jesus is hung out to die. And it's not enough for his back to feel the whip, his head to feel the thorns, or his hands to feel the nails. No, they got to add insult to injury. They can't deny that Jesus helps others. But Jesus' goodness just makes them hate him all the more. They mock him for who he really is. These leaders show us a nasty human tendency to turn away from God and hate what is true. Next, the soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." The soldiers spent the morning mocking Jesus, clothing him in a purple robe, pushing a crown of thorns on his head. Now, they continue to make fun of a guy they just nailed naked to a beam of wood. These soldiers show us a nasty human tendency to turn away from God and prey upon the weak. Also, there was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." Pontius Pilate had just presided over the greatest miscarriage of justice in human history. Now, he washes his hands of Jesus and makes this sign to show everybody what he thinks of the Jews and their king. And Pilate shows us a nasty human tendency to turn away from God so what is right can be wrong and what is wrong can be right. Finally, one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." A common criminal insults the Christ. And what is more humiliating than being heckled by the dregs of society? This criminal shows us a nasty human tendency to have no true fear of God, no faith in God, or love for God, and yet expect everything from him, even salvation itself. Christ is the King we don't expect. We don't expect kings to be humiliated by governors or brutalized by soldiers. We don't expect kings to get mocked by nobodies or men on death row. We expect kings to be on thrones, not crosses. We expect kings to wear crowns, not thorns. We expect kings to march down Main Street to the blast of brass, not a crowd's catcalls. Jesus is a king ridiculed. And doesn't that just make you angry? Aren't you thinking, "Oh man, if I were there, I would have told those leaders to stuff a sock in it. I would have told the soldiers enough already. If I were there, I would have torn down that sign from above the cross and put up John 3:16 instead. I would have told that criminal to keep his mouth shut. If I were there, I would have knelt down before the cross and thanked Jesus for his sacrifice." Would you? The question of how you would react is best answered with another question. Why is Christ there? Christ is there on the cross because if you were there, you would find your place in the crowd. How can you tell the leaders to stuff a sock in it when so often you have a sock in your mouth when it comes to speaking God's truth? How can you tell the soldiers to be nice when so often you enjoy hurting others? Not with hammer and nails, no, but with words to wound. How can you tear down Pilate's sign when your entire life is a walking billboard for sin? Light hidden under a bowl, salt that has lost its saltiness. How can I rebuke a criminal when I know that deep down the only difference between him and me is that I haven't been caught yet? If you were there, you would turn your back on Jesus, just like everyone else. Me too. We would show a nasty human tendency to turn away from God so we can go right along with the crowd. But then, something happens that no one expects. But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." If there's such a thing as a living hell, this guy is experiencing it. Nails through his hands and his feet, bloody, naked, hanging on a tree, an example for the whole world to see. On a cross, every second is torture until finally death comes. But this guy has got the gnawing feeling in his stomach that something far worse is waiting for him after he dies. Yet, in the middle of this living hell, he catches a glimpse of heaven. He's got to hear Jesus' prayer about his executioners. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." So he defends Jesus and makes a simple request. "Remember me." And Jesus, the king ridiculed, is the king redeeming. Jesus answers the thief's prayer immediately, beyond his wildest dreams. "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." With 13 words, Jesus shows us a marvelous tendency in God, the tendency to be gracious with the most undeserving. Jesus is the key to heaven, even and especially for criminals on crosses. And with one sentence, Jesus turns that key and opens the gates of paradise for this man. How can that be? Because Jesus came to save us by not saving himself. Did you catch the common temptation that weaves its way through all the ridicule? Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God. If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. Save yourself. Save yourself. Save yourself. Jesus could have saved himself easily, washed his hands of Pilate and the rest, and let the world go to hell. But Jesus doesn't do that. Instead of saving himself, he sacrifices himself. His forsakenness is your forgiveness. His judgment is your justification. His humiliation is your glory. His punishment is your peace. His wounds are your healing. His death is your life. And because of all that, you can pray, "Jesus, remember me. Remember me in depression, when life is only clouds and loneliness. Remember me in heartbreak, when everything hurts. Remember me in turmoil, when those I love the most are terrible to me. Remember me in sickness, when I can't remember feeling well. Remember me at the funeral home, when tears sting my eyes. Remember me whenever life reminds me that I am not in heaven yet. Just remember me." Jesus answers that prayer. He does remember you. In fact, Jesus even remembers the number of hairs on your head. His memory is perfect. So tonight we rejoice that Jesus even remembers to forget. Remember not the sins of my youth or my rebellious ways. Psalm 25, verse 7. Jesus answers that prayer too. Which is precisely why one day, someday, maybe even this day, you will be with Jesus and a forgiven criminal in paradise. Who would have expected that? Happy Lent. Amen. We continue with the offering.